So huge new competitive pressures from organizations that have that, that data-driven culture.
He said that data-driven organizations are 23 times more likely to acquire customers and 6 times more likely to retain customers.
It's very hard to uncouple the data from those very cluttered systems that have been in place for quite some time.
We believe that all of the data we have is in the Excel spreadsheets that we've populated it in, which is not the case, as you're highlighting. I think that's a very big statement that needs to be considered by most utility organisations, that they do in fact have a long way to go. And I love, Razia, that you mentioned when you first started sharing your insights that data is everywhere. And I think that really challenges some of the, maybe the comfort in thinking that a lot of organisations perhaps have had, that oh, well, we believe that all of the data we have is in the Excel spreadsheets that we've populated it in, which is not the case, as you're highlighting. And I also love how you mentioned predictive analytics being a potential major game changer. And Joe, I'd love to hear your thoughts on sort of the role of data insight more broadly, but specifically when we think about predictive analytics being a game changer, in the context of planning and decision making amongst transmission and distribution network operators, particularly when we sort of take a step back and think about the disruptions you were speaking to earlier, the 3Ds plus E, if I've got it correct, where significant network infrastructure investment is required as a consequence of all of that disruption.
Yeah, look, this is a fascinating area, and I think we should really keep very much in mind that there, especially in the horizontally disaggregated markets like Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Texas, there are a few around. You've got this separation of the natural monopolies of the T&D from the naturally competitive parts of the market, and that presents some quite different challenges in terms of the impact of the energy transition from more vertically integrated markets. So touching on, what does it look like from transmission and distribution? Well, whether you're looking at the, Biden's $1.2 trillion infrastructure package, whether you're looking at the European Union's Green New Deal, or whether you're looking locally at what's increasingly state-based investment strategies around new renewable energy zones and a hydrogen economy that we're seeing amongst the different states in Australia, people might sort of focus down on perhaps a inconsistent policy environment, but at the same time we have to keep in mind that each individual Australian state has got some pretty aggressive net zero and decarbonisation strategies. If we bring it down to one state in particular, you look at New South Wales with its electricity roadmap and the increasing planning around introducing renewable energy zones, which, as they're announced, have been massively oversubscribed by private investors. But what does all this mean from a transmission and distribution perspective? You're seeing effectively this shift away from large scale, maybe a few dozen big centralized thermal generators, to many hundreds of much more distributed renewable energy generators at grid scale, right the way through, of course, to at its most extreme level to the 3 million solar rooftops I described earlier. But if we look at it from the transmission perspective, so there is an enormous amount of transmission infrastructure that's going to have to be built to support a shift towards these new renewable energy zones. And this has been the biggest choke point, or certainly one of the biggest choke points in Australia's energy transition. So, the planning, regulatory approval, community engagement, and that sort of end-to-end capital project management really has been incredibly sort of manual intensive, lacking in end-to-end visibility, really sort of subject to lots of disconnected IT systems and silos. And you're talking multiple $billion investments in this. So, any efficiency around that can really, even a few percentage points can have big financial and efficiency impact. We've got multiple years of process involved in getting through a regulatory approval process to build phase for transmission infrastructure. It's just not tenable anymore as we advance and accelerate the energy transition. So if we're going to remove that choke point, we need to, as an industry, have a much more dramatic shift to real data-driven decision making, away from the manual intensive processes and planning, much more streamlined grid connections, both at a transmission and a distribution level, increasing in their complexity. How do you streamline that? How do you enable more by the way of self-service for all of these new distributed renewable energy generators? So things like that are going to be really dramatic shift in terms of planning and in terms of data-driven decision making.
Yeah, I think, Joe, you've really highlighted a key point there, which is there needs to be a dramatic shift to data-driven decision making, from end to end across the entire sector. And especially when we consider what, Razia, you shared earlier around traditionally most utility organisations perhaps didn't have a data strategy, and hence their fundamental business models and competitive agility are now being very much threatened by new entrants, say Telstra and the like, who do have a strong retail position and really understand the value of deriving insight out of data, not only to win and retain customers, but also to, I suppose, improve employee experience. So, Luke, when we think about the fact that across many utility organisations traditionally, this culture of sharing data across teams probably hasn't been that commonplace. Is there a lot of work to do here, generally speaking, across leadership teams in terms of the mindset that's taken to be able to, one, respond to, but two, also harness the disruption that's unfolding?
I think it's a really good part of the conversation, leadership from a utility point of view. Razia put it well. I'm going to touch on both what Razia and Joe said, but Razia put it well when explaining about the systems and the applications that are in place. So, it's a tough gig for utilities because they started with a very low barrier to entry point. Some of the bigger companies burst onto the scene with systems, but there were lots of startups that, for $500,000 Australian and your license, you could get yourself a billing system and get going from selling, retailing energy. And I think what I'm seeing is some of those remnants of those systems and applications are still in place for a lot of the retailers that we see in play across the country and in New Zealand. This is problematic because what it means is that, as Razia put it, they're not able to work in more agile ways and be able to respond more quickly as the market dynamics change. And it's very hard to uncouple the data from those very cluttered systems that have been in place for quite some time. Most of the energy businesses in Australia used to refer to their customers as NIMIs, which is a national metering number. They didn't even know who lived at the place or the name of the person. They just referred to the NIMI number. And so unlocking information about customers over the last, 10, 5 years, 2 years, has been a difficult thing for utilities to start to comprehend. And I think I'll give some credit here and say they're on the journey, but there's a lot more to be done. And what I think really Razia was highlighting is that, the new players into this environment won't have those barriers. It won't have those constraints. And so really, I think from a leadership point of view of thinking about, well, how do we awaken our capabilities? Yes, we're getting agile coaching and we're probably getting, new systems in place, but let's do something really fundamental. How do we get information about our business, data, 360 view, all those things that I heard Razia talk about are very meaningful for the boards and executives of utilities businesses. You know, their customer base is where their value comes from. And yet we live in an age where customers churn. There are comparatives in the market that churn customers on purpose to make their own business. The cost to serve and cost to acquire customers is constantly under pressure. And you know, you've got these residential customers, and I think Joe touched on this earlier. There's a social responsibility here too. You know, people can't afford energy. The prices have gone up. We have lack of, you know, policy and regulation around this stuff. So there's lots of consideration. Data is going to play such a critical role in whether your utility survives this next round or not, and is still of value to shareholders and to your owners, because your customer base needs to stay the same or grow in a market which is going to be very, very competitive. So I think that what Razia explained about the fact that putting in place a data strategy, you know, I don't like the word strategy, a roadmap is probably better, you know, strategy, I don't know, roadmap, getting in place a culture that is data-driven decision-making, and also getting hold of a tool like Tableau that can give you that 360-degree view, can work ubiquitously across all technologies, and can source the information on your behalf and provide you the detail. All the boards that I've reported into have made me manually pull out reports and give them a lot of data. You know what? It's never right, never precise. That's where I think this technology can really make a big difference.
And I think, you know, Luke, a couple of key takeaways from my point of view based on what you've just shared. You know, I think there's no denying that the utility sector, not just in Australia and New Zealand, but globally, is increasingly contested and becoming a lot more competitive. So there's probably never been a better time to, what you said, to try and unlock information about your customers, to be able to create and provide more value. And also like your reference to awaken our capabilities. And I'd probably add on to that, and also the possibilities that can come from unlocking crucial insight about the data across an organisation in the utility sector. Razia, it'd be great to hear your views just based on what Luke's shared. How would you describe the relationship between data culture and customer success? So all the way from customer acquisition right through to retention. What's the relationship between data culture and customer success?
Yeah, I actually really valued what Luke said about data being a commodity, but how valuable it is. People actually call data the new oil. Like I don't know if you've heard that saying, but I've heard that so many times. Every time I talk to people, it's something that I hear a lot. And I think, you know, in terms of data culture and customer success, I think taking a step back, what we really believe at Tableau is that data should be available for everybody, right? Our mission statement at Tableau is to help people see and understand data. And basically, it's really important for organizations to build and sustain a data culture that is actually complete, that practices data-driven behaviors, that prioritizes data in decision-making, and that also encourages those internal data communities so that everyone is united in terms of, you know, how they feel about data, and they actually use that data and lead with data. And by investing in a data culture and using technologies like Tableau that support data culture, organizations become more data-driven. And I read I'm probably sure that the report is old now. It's a McKinsey Global Institute report that basically did a report on they basically said that data-driven organizations are 23 times more likely to acquire customers and 6 times more likely to retain customers. So that actually goes to show that there is a really strong correlation between data culture and customer success. And then to further, I guess, add to that, I wanted to actually use a personal example. I was talking about this to Joe a lot earlier, and basically I was saying that as a customer, just as a customer of a utility company, I was with the same utility company for 7 years. And I decided a few months ago that it was time for me to change. And price wasn't actually the only driving factor in order for me to move to different utility companies. What was really important for me is for the utility company to actually share my own data with me so that I could actually understand the kind of carbon footprint that I, generated through my own electrical usage and consumption. And that was actually one of the reasons why I changed companies, because what I realized is that by providing insight into my own data, into my own activities, I could actually become a bit more environmentally conscious, because that's everyone's responsibility, right? And I wanted to actually join a utility company that adopted climate change and provided strategies on how they were going to tackle all of these issues. And then by flipping that as a Tableau sales engineer, working with utility companies or different companies, I help them to address all of these business challenges that are associated with data. How do they provide the right data at the right time to their own employees? How do they ensure that they've got real-time data available, that it's fresh data, it's not stale data that employees are actually using to make those important business decisions? And also, a specific customer division that I worked with was, say, for example, a contact center division where customers would call to ask questions about their bill, about their utility usage and things like that. And the agents themselves weren't able to actually get the data. They had to constantly put the customer on hold. And the customer, every time they get an answer, they might ask a different question. They'd have to put them on hold again because they didn't have a consolidated view of their data in front of them, would actually cause a lot of customer satisfaction issues. And Tableau actually addressed that by consolidating that data and helping those agents to better service the customers, to streamline better customer support and have those smoother customer experiences. And Sally, as I mentioned earlier as well, that, predictive analytics actually play a part of that. So Tableau also offers those business science capabilities that actually enhance the customer experience. And business science capabilities, you can think of that as data science for business users, where we use customers' historical data to predict their future trends, right? So in this customer contact center example, when a customer called, the agent would actually have the customer's full data in front of them. They would actually have information already based on their previous calls, based on their previous perhaps escalations. What was the likelihood, the prediction rate of that customer to churn? And a prediction rate would be provided, say, for example, 70%. And Tableau would also provide actual recommendations that could be applied by the agent to actually retain that customer. And that would be done by maybe lowering the cost of the bill, maybe escalating the case to a different department. But insights and recommendations were provided on the fly to those agents to help retain that customer service and experience. So that's just an example that I wanted to use from an actual utility customer to a Tableau employee helping customers.
At the front end, at the back end, we need to be as efficient as we can. And the only way to be efficient is to get the information and look at the data that supports the decision-making of being as efficient as we can be. And does that create empowered, happy, engaged employees? Yes, it does.
Do the companies trust their own data? I think that's a big thing that we discuss at the moment, like what data governance strategies are currently in place.
New generation of digital first employee, which really wants to be able to service the customer effectively, have the right insight at the right time,